ARK 2. It was announced as the upcoming sequel to ARK Survival Evolved at the Game Awards all the way back on December 10th, 2020. With the vague release date of 2022, it was inevitably pushed back to 2023. Well, now it's 2025. After 4 years of delays and counting, an Unreal Engine 5 remaster for Survival Evolved, and a second trailer for ARK 2 in hand, the game is still shrouded in mystery. Though we've gotten some cool concept art for building, fishing, and some really sick-looking dinosaurs, compared to what we should know by now, we know virtually nothing. Though, not from a narrative perspective. You see, I've been following ARK 2 for these past 4 years, slowly piecing together what it is, and what it could entail for not only ARK's story, but ARK's future as a whole. In this video, I'll be explaining both ARK 2 and Bob's Tall Tales, as they both tell the same story, and are two halves of the same whole. We'll be starting our ARK lore deep dive chronologically, but not with ARK 2. Before we can do that, we need to rewind, to backtrack if you will, all the way back to the ending of Genesis Part 2. After confronting Rockwell in the Starlight Viewing Gallery and defeating him once and for all, HLNA is forced to detach the Eden Ring from the rest of the Genesis ship, launching the survivor into space, and allowing the singular ring to release Earth life onto the planet below. Looking back at the ship, we hear a transmission between HLNA and Rockwell, as the two of them share their final conversation.
It's alright. Helena. I'm afraid.
She knew.
After a heartfelt message to the survivor left behind by HLNA, we're treated to a post-credit scene where we see Santiago da Costa, now portrayed by Vin Diesel, being released from cryosleep and sent onto the ARK 2 planet alongside the rest of Eden's contents via drop pod.
Respawned again.
Insertion remains successful. Stable area confirmed. Warning. Emergency evacuation in progress. Docking clamps released.
Something tells me that this is the easy part.
With the ending of Genesis 2 out of the way, what we know is that Santiago was one of the colonists preserved aboard the Genesis ship, and he was released onto this alien planet as a part of the Arrival, which, if you aren't aware, was the main mission of Genesis 1. Train survivors in the Genesis simulation in order to harden them for whatever Earth-like planet the ship can eventually find. Now we're able to continue, onto the first of two ARK 2 trailers, the one shown to us at 2020's Game Awards, where we get our first glimpse of the alien planet Genesis chose as its final destination. The trailer starts with this little girl. Her name is Mika, captivated by this strange alien plant creature. Oh hey, yeah, he survived the landing.
It's time to go.
Behind Mika are some other survivors she's traveling with, led by Santiago. According to the ARK 2 Steam page, and made apparent throughout the rest of the trailer through Santiago's actions, Mika's actually his daughter. But I'll explain how and why that's even possible later. Though the tribe has no clear motive for where they're going, Santiago keeps a keen eye on Mika the whole time. And all seems well, until he senses the presence of these strange, disheveled blue alien guys called the ARK, who come out of hiding to ambush and intercept the survivors. There's a very justified reason as to why they do this, but we'll get to why that is later in the video. One thing I want you to keep in mind is their name, the ARK. This will also be important later. The next 30 seconds are filled with lots of Fast and Furious level fight choreography between Santiago and the alien interlopers. Until the sexy new ARK 2 Rex stomps through the forest in all its prehistoric glory, interrupting the heated conflict. The survivors all scatter, except for Mika. But before she can get eaten alive, another survivor in the group sacrifices themselves so that Mika can escape. After downing a few more Aratai, Santiago comes face to face with the Rex himself, and chucks his spear into its side before gunning it for his now distanced tribe, who are still contending with the other Aratai. Upon catching up to the others, Santiago throws his axe at and punches the living shit out of yet another Aratai. Before running further into the valley, the now aggravated Rex chasing them the whole time, causing carnage in its wake. Walking deeper into the newfound darkness surrounding them, what remains of Santiago's tribe is met with a strange sight. A dimly lit grotto fitted with cave paintings, illuminated by decrepit yet still active tech. An interesting fact about this area is its striking similarity to the rooms seen at the end of Genesis Part 1. From the identical construct in the center of the room, to the two large cryopods which held other colonist survivors, including ourselves, it's safe to say that these two locations are one and the same. Santiago approaches the sole remaining cryopod, and it activates under his presence. Here we get quite a bit of character background for him from his specimen ID. He was born in the 24th century in a Sao Paulo municipality as a citizen of the Tehran Federation. He's 6 foot tall, weighs 224 pounds, is blood type O negative, you get the picture. Fun fact, as of writing, the full name we get from this interface isn't actually Santiago's original name, which was initially revealed to us on Extinction in Dialog number 2, as Santiago Nightmare Camacho. This discrepancy is probably just an oversight by the new lead writer Peter Fries, but honestly, I kinda like the old name better, since it actually had a hidden meaning which kind of ties into Santiago's character better as a whole. You see, Santiago is a name of Hebrew and Spanish origin that means supplanter. His new surname, Da Costa, is of Latin and Spanish origin and means someone who lives on a slope or on a riverbank or on the seacoast. When put together, Santiago da Costa means the supplanter who lives on a slope or on a riverbank or on the seacoast, in reference to his newly revealed origin of birth, Sao Paulo, a coastal region in Brazil. Whereas Camacho is a surname of Spanish and Portuguese origin that comes from the Gaelic word that means twisted or disfigured, thus making Santiago Camacho translate to the twisted supplanter, in what's possibly a direct reference to element itself, specifically the toxic element corruption which took hold of, or by definition, supplanted the planet Earth, as a direct result of the devastating tech weaponry Santiago made for the Federation armed forces of the 24th century. I'm not just pointing out Santiago's two names for posterity's sake, in fact, quite the opposite. Santiago da Costa and Santiago Camacho, while technically being two different versions, or clones, of the same person, act quite differently from one another in a lot of ways. Though, I do think this is something Wildcard intends to fix, as not too long ago, I myself was actually given the lucky opportunity to point out some of these story errors to Studio Wildcard co-founder Jeremy Steiglitz, in exchange for receiving my name in the credits, which is utterly badass. Not to toot my own horn. That said, at this point, we'll just have to see which name sticks. Regardless, after accessing the cryopod's interface, Santiago navigates himself to the Genesis system, where he purges all of its data.
Lights out, old friend.
Leaving the cave with Mika, the two of them startle some pteranodons and overlook their new alien planet, with a renewed sense of contentment on their faces. Now, why one singular person has the kind of power to delete the entire Genesis system invested in them, whether or not they were a part of the initial Genesis crew or not, I have no idea. But this moment is crucial to understanding Santiago's character in Arc 2, as I'll explain here. To get some backstory as to why Santiago wiped the Genesis system, and as to why he seems to hate tech as a whole in Arc 2, as we'll see later, we first need to make an analysis on the two versions of Santiago we see in the Ark story, the Twisted Supplanter and the one who lives by the coast. We are first introduced to Santiago A, or Santiago Camacho, on Aberration as the main conceptualizer of the portal, and the version of Santiago who eventually went on to construct the mechs before sacrificing himself for Helena and the others at Camp Omega on Extinction. We are first introduced to Santiago B, or Santiago da Costa, in Genesis Part 2, as another version of Santiago, who actually predates Santiago Camacho, as he was alive back when they were still building the Genesis ship and the ARKs. This Santiago helped lead in deciding environmental diversity aboard the ship, and eventually died when he was caught in the crossfires of a suicide bombing enacted by a distraught coworker. The main difference between these two Santiagos are their reactions to the dying or dead state of Earth, and how they come to terms with the fact that they themselves had caused it. Whereas Santiago A comes to see the corrupted Earth on Extinction and feels a sense of remorse for his contributions in the element wars which caused the apocalypse, ultimately, he put aside his feelings in order to design more tech weaponry in the form of the mechs, so he and his friends could defeat the Titans. As he puts it, fighting fire with an even bigger fire. Santiago B, however, doesn't actually get to see the Earth as Santiago A does on Extinction. As in Santiago B's time, humanity was only nearing the end of the world, as Earth was on a crash course to becoming uninhabitable. Seeing this, he agrees to work on the Genesis ship, and spends a portion of his time there feeling guilty over the damage he had caused to the planet. So much so that he went on to design the Striders, creating a way to remove the toxic element polluting the soil inside the ship's rings. That is to say, despite continuing to create tech for the greater cause of preserving humanity through Genesis, this Santiago doesn't appear to be at all interested in tech beyond that. As it stands, the version of Santiago we see in Arc 2 is most likely a clone of Santiago B, for numerous reasons, the most prevalent of which is based on his knowledge of Genesis, something that Santiago A lacks. This effectively kind of makes him a Santiago C, though I'll just refer to him as Arc 2 Santiago going forward. The reason I say he's kind of a Santiago C is because it's implied through Bob's Tall Tales that Arc 2 Santiago, despite being a clone of Gen 2 Santiago, and never having actually been on an Ark himself, somehow learns of or retains memories from his past self on the Arks, as Aberration through Extinction Santiago. Arc 2 Santiago's personality is also arguably more faithful to his portrayal in Genesis, and we know this not only through his actions of deleting Genesis, but also the way he acts towards Mika in Bob's Tall Tales. And before we go on to talk about Bob's Tall Tales, we need to discuss the second Arc 2 trailer, which was released in 2022, which thankfully is only about a minute long. Though this trailer is shorter than the previous one, I feel like it's just as important to understanding the background of Arc 2, as it offers up some interesting details, like where it takes place, and some additional backstory for Mika. As I mentioned before, she's the daughter of Santiago, as confirmed in her own words here.
My dad tells stories of a terrible war that happened across the sky.
We also get an offhand mention of Gen 2 through her following line, but what she says next has some potentially really deep implications.
Heroes fought and died to give us a chance to start over. All that I know from their Earth are the creatures they sent along with us.
This sentence is really interesting because it straight up confirms that, despite originating from Earth and existing as a clone in ARK 2, as we can tell from her specimen implant, Mika has little to no knowledge of Earth outside of its dinosaurs. I'll bring this up again near the end of the video, but the implications here could be really, really dark.
And here on Arat, every day is a fight to survive.
Speaking of Earth and planets in general, Mika name drops the ARK 2 planet here as Arat. Remember how I told you to keep these guys' names in mind for later? Well, if you didn't catch on earlier when I was telling you that, now you know why I did. This planet is indeed named Arat, not to be confused with Arat Prime, a location some of you might be familiar with, and the one we're all but confirmed to be seeing in Survival Ascended's Lost Colony DLC. I'll keep this explanation brief because I want to make a separate video on this later, but Arat Prime is implied to be the launch site of the Gen ship, on the other side of Earth to Sanctuary. The planet Arat is essentially the final destination of the colony ship and was named after Arat Prime. Considering the fact that the Genesis ship didn't actually have a predetermined destination, instead sailing the cosmos for generations at random, it's likely that the planet was named post-arrival by whom I can only assume to be Santiago, seeing as this is all information he would have, having worked on Genesis in one of his past lives.
But if anyone can tame this new world, we can.
And so ends the second ARK 2 trailer, with Mika and Santiago atop a Rex, standing amongst the beautiful environment of Arat. Boy, I sure can't wait to get there in 2069. Probably. No promises. With most of the ARK 2 stuff explained to this point, as I promised, it's time for us to dive into Bob's Tall Tales, which gives us additional introspection into ARK 2's plot, setting, and characters, through none other than a beach Bob. Releasing with Scorched Earth Ascended on the 1st of April 2024, alongside plenty of new structures, tames, and game mechanics, the story of Bob's Tall Tales takes place on Arat, and gives us a prologue to the ARK 2 story, starring Mika and the titular new survivor Bob. Not this Bob, though. This Bob. Both ARK 2 Bob and animated series Bob share the same backstory of being one of the heroes who died storming Normandy during World War II in 1994, and are technically the same survivor. The only difference being that Bob from the animated series isn't actually canon, because the animated series itself isn't canon. If you didn't know, it's more of a retelling of the ARK story, rather than a one-to-one adaptation of the Explorer Notes. But that's a topic for another video. Anyways, the first installment of Bob's Tall Tales begins in light of a conversation between Bob and Mika, after what's implied to be some sort of falling out between her and Santiago.
You know, kid, sooner or later, you're gonna have to talk about it. What are you drawing over there, anyway? Hey, that's not bad. And this is you over here, with this dum-dum?
Don't be mean to Honker! No, I don't want to talk about him.
Despite her visible frustration, Bob approaches Mika, offering a little background to his history with her father, and his time on the ARKs.
Maybe old Uncle Bob here can shed some light on the situation, about why the big man thinks the way he does.
Wait, you knew my dad before all this? So, were you also on the, what did he call them? The ARKs?
Yeah, those.
Bob proceeds to tell Mika about his time on the island, though we the viewer don't actually get to see this play out. This is probably because, seeing as Bob's Tall Tales was set to add additional content to Scorched Earth through Extinction, the island wasn't really relevant to the DLC, and thus gets glossed over. Regardless, I'll cover what little information we were given regarding Bob and his time on the island.
That island was the first time I ever saw big dumb lizards like Honker here. And it was the first place I ran into her.
Before eventually ascending and seeing what is implied to be Helena in her Homo Deus form, the one who waits, just as we do in-game before and after beating a map.
Bob, you're the greatest guy ever. You have to stay alive so you can save everyone.
This little detail almost immediately confirms that Bob's Tall Tales are exactly that. Fictitious stories made up by Bob on the spot to tell Mika. That is to say, Bob couldn't have possibly met Helena on the island, only to encounter her as a Homo Deus immediately after, as she only became a Homo Deus during the events of Extinction. If you haven't already caught on from the name alone, Bob's Tall Tales is essentially a melting pot of Bob's own experiences mixed with what's actually written in the Explorer Notes. This isn't the only detail implying this fact, but if I pointed out each and every little discrepancy made in Bob's Tall Tales, we'd be here for hours. Just know that, going forward, the stories Bob tells Mika are canon, as in, he's canonically telling them to her, but the events in the stories themselves aren't canon, if that makes sense. Tasked with saving the world by Helena Deus, Bob concedes to Mika that he wouldn't have been able to do it alone.
Well, now, I did have a little help from my friends.
Not without his friends, Helena and Rockwell.
But maybe that's a story for another time. I mean, you gotta have some chores to get back to, right?
I already did them, I swear.
Great. Guess I'll just, keep retelling these true tales about Bob's amazing adventures.
Yeah! Woo!
Though Bob fails to shake Mika off, he advises her to, at the very least, tell Santiago where she's been. Mika refuses, insisting instead that Bob continue his tall tales, which leads us into Scorched Earth.
I want to hear more stories. Uncle Bob.
Okay. How about a story with spurs and six-shooters and all that?
Yeah, that sounds wild.
Darling, you don't know the half of it. But whatever the danger, Bob still managed to show the wild and woolly wastelands who's boss.
Whoa, now we're talking.
Bob describes wandering around the desert aimlessly, dehydrated and berated by the intense heat. In a stupor, he snatches up and drinks from an oh-so-convenient bottle of whiskey, which turns out to be nothing more than a jug bug.
Ew, gross.
Made that jug bug jump a mile. Not that I blame it. Who'd have guessed something that big could even fly anyway? At least I knew where to find water now.
Though no longer parched, Bob tamed up a Morellotopsy named Humpty, which provided him with an even steadier supply of water.
It was probably an easier way to break the dumb beast than smacking him upside the head and force-feeding him. But that's what worked for me back on the island. Anyways, I guess I finally hit one in its noggin enough time for it to think we were pals.
Aww.
What Humpty couldn't provide him with, though, was protection from the lightning sandstorm which soon kicked up.
Howling wind, lightning had me going in circles, trying like heck to find a place to hide. Thought I was done for when Humpty dropped dead on me.
Leaving Bob again to his own devices.
Poor Humpty.
After making a mad dash to a nearby cave, Bob stumbles on some wyvern eggs, which he attempts to make a meal out of.
And that's when Mama, an honest-to-gosh dragon, turned up.
Unsurprisingly, one thing led to another, and Bob was chased out and into the open by the mama wyvern.
Bet you barely got out of that one without becoming her breakfast. No scrambled Bob on the menu that day.
Sometime later, Helena actually turned up, quickly followed by her new friend Raya, on the back of another wyvern, naturally. Raya was glad to have found Bob, as she needed a new sheriff for her settlement, which was suffering frequent mantis attacks.
What's a sheriff?
Someone who'd protect regular townsfolk, whether it was from rustlers, bandits, or, in this case, bug monsters.
Bob accepts the mantle and demands a duel from the Mantis' leader, before effortlessly shooting most of the gang dead, leaving the rest to run for the hills, or, in this case, the dunes.
Wasn't much of a fair fight. None of them so much as got a beat on me before I dropped all 4 of them in the dust with their pal.
Bob considers making a home of Raya's settlement, only before she warns him not to get too attached.
That's when the witch piped up to tell us why it wasn't worth getting attached to no place there.
Oh no, why?
Said she and her friends had a regular boom town going across the desert that got blown to heck by something in the sky.
Raya then brings Bob alongside Helena and Rockwell to see the ruins of Nosti for themselves. Oh yeah, did I forget to mention, Rockwell showed his face right after the big shootout back in the other settlement. Anyways, it's in the ruins of Nosti that the 4 survivors encounter the Manticore.
We were saying our goodbyes when that thing dropped in. The witch called it a manticore, or maybe a manticlops. Anyway, whatever you want to call it. It caused a real ruckus. I like to think we made it sorry for messing with us.
Where Bob is quickly knocked unconscious, coming to mid-ascension alongside Helena and Rockwell, thus ending his Scorched Earth Tall Tales.
So, that's how I went from squeezing water from a cactus to fighting a Mandy Whatsit in a ghost town.
Wicked.
Just goes to show, you gotta stay ready for the unexpected. And you'll always need to stick by the folks who have your back.
Shifting our attention back to Arat, Mika tells Bob that he has yet to explain where he met Santiago. Though Bob recommends that she go ask him herself, Mika's adamant on keeping clear of her father.
No way! Unlike you, he's got no sense of humor.
You just sit tight while your Uncle Bob thinks about how to tell this next part without giving nightmares.
But I like scary stories.
Hey now, I was talking about it giving me nightmares. See, this is the point in our story where things get dark. Real dark.
Awesome.
Some time passes, and we see Bob overlooking Mika's drawings, declaring that they may be useful in helping him remember what he got up to in the old days.
Next time some kid starts hanging around me like a bad smell, pestering me for my dumb tales.
Interesting note, Bob's steampunk tales, despite containing literally no steampunk aspects in the story, is actually a pretty straightforward and even relatively accurate recap of Aberration's Explorer notes, just with Bob self-inserted into the most important story beats. This doesn't really imply anything, but I thought I may as well point that out, since both Scorched Earth and Extinction feature prominent Frontier Showdown and Wasteland War aspects respectively, while ditching a lot of the pre-existing Explorer notes.
Quit stalling.
Okay. How about we call this one Journey to the Center of the Broken Ark?
As long as it's the scary version.
Careful what you wish for. Things got weird and dark down there, especially for poor Doc Rockwell.
Ascending from Scorched Earth onto Aberration, Bob, Helena, and Rockwell made their way into the Aberrant Caves, faced with the danger of surviving the depths. Naturally, Helena and Rockwell both wandered off, deeper and deeper into the caverns out of curiosity.
Doc Rockwell, in particular, kept wandering deeper and deeper in where I couldn't keep an eye on him.
But before Bob could round the both of them up, an earthquake began shaking the entire Ark. Using spare resources the earthquake shook loose, the 3 survivors staved off hunger by eating the local mushrooms, before eventually graduating to the local wildlife.
In fact, you'd be surprised what you're willing to eat when you're starving for real. Just like chicken.
Poor Bobby.
Inevitably, though, they eventually came face to face with Aberration's less docile wildlife, a flock of ravenous seekers looking for their next meal. Luckily, another survivor donning a suit of tech armor came to rescue them all, and who else could it be but Mei-Yin Lee, the Beast Queen of the Jungle, whom, interestingly enough, wasn't brought up in Bob's initial recapping of the island to Mika, which is weird considering how crucial she is to that story. But anyways, Mei-Yin accompanies Bob, Helena, and Rockwell to the Tech Village, which is where they met the rest of the Tech Tribe.
Anyway, you'll never guess who was in charge of their outfit.
My dad.
Huh. Yeah, that's where old Santiago and I met for the very first time. I introduced him to my pals. Not that Doc even noticed. He was too busy gawking at all the shiny toys those future people had brought to the camp.
While Rockwell had become severely preoccupied with all the fancy new tech he laid his eyes on, Bob, Helena, and May had caught Santiago in the midst of trying to unlock a deeper understanding of the ARK and how it worked. So setting out to the surface on a crucial life or death mission, they leave Rockwell behind with a good friend of Santiago and Mei-Yin, a woman named Diana Alterez.
Don't think Diana trusted old Doc Rockwell. He'd been acting extra squirrely by then, and she seemed worried that he'd gone completely off his nut. Good instincts, hers.
Good instincts.
We had our marching orders, but before Santiago took us topside, we had to suit ourselves up in that shiny future armor of theirs. Supposedly radiation from space would have cooked us otherwise.
Equipped with full tech armor to avoid radiation from space and under the cover of darkness, the four survivors hacked into an obelisk on the surface, teleporting themselves into a laboratory in the center of the ARK, one containing giant cryopods filled with various creatures and other survivors. The others defended Santiago while he messed around with a terminal, before everything was interrupted by a distress signal coming from the tech city.
Something bad went down back at camp.
Oh no. Was Diana okay?
Upon teleporting back to camp, the group found Diana slain amongst the now destroyed tech city Rockwell had left behind, after he had used liquid element to transform himself into a hulking, mutant monstrosity.
He found some goop deep down in the caves. He used it to change himself into something straight out of a creature feature.
Rockwell killed her?
Yup. And scampered off somewhere down in the dark. Coward that he was.
Everyone then geared up and chased after Rockwell into the depths of Aberration.
We could barely keep up with the Beast Queen. She really took it hard what Rockwell did to her good friend.
But you found him, right?
What was left of the poor guy. And then put that twisted freak out of his misery and ours.
By the time Santiago had caught up with the others, he had primed the portal, which I guess hadn't been mentioned up until this point, for their final destination, the planet Earth.
Believe you me, spoke for all of us when he said he wanted to forget all about the place, especially that creepy cargo hold we found, full of clones. Wasn't great finding out for sure we weren't the original Bob or Santiago. How many times have we died and been brought back already? Just thinking about it gave me the heebie-jeebies.
Brought back.
Clearly this detail gets Mika's interest piqued, and so she asks Bob about the clones, and I guess by extension, themselves. To which he gives her a pretty vague rundown.
Copies of our original selves, but with our memories and, I don't know, maybe our souls too. Who knows? It's all way beyond this GI's pay grade.
While it's not particularly relevant here, an interesting thing to note from his Aberration epilogue is Bob's semi-confirmation of human souls in the ARK universe, since before now, the only time they've been brought up has been through She Who Waits, who mentions them under a very interpretable context. Anyways, it's apparent that Mika doesn't really understand the intricacies as to why she exists as she does. And neither does Bob, who at this point tells her pretty bluntly that he doesn't really know, nor entirely understand what actually happened on the ARKs.
Mika, listen, kid. These are just dumb stories. I don't know the half of what actually went on down there.
No, that part was true. I can tell.
This detail is also important in regards to who Bob really is, but for now, just add this to the ever-growing pile of things to keep in mind for later. Mika then pretty much comes to the conclusion that, through the use of tech, one would be able to bring other, long-since-past survivors back from the dead. This idea is only met with scrutiny though, as Bob warns her that Rockwell also wanted to bring someone back with tech, or more accurately, Element.
Didn't work out so good for him, did it?
If you're familiar with some of Rockwell's newer lore, specifically some plot points introduced in the animated series, you might be able to see what this is implying. I might save this piece of information for a later video somewhere down the line, but the TLDR is that Rockwell wanted to bring back a little girl, presumed to be his daughter, Charlotte, back from the dead. What he ended up doing instead is becoming the element-driven overseer of Aberration. But like I said, that's a story for another day. Mika rejects Bob's warnings against tech, arguing that Rockwell couldn't really understand it seeing as he came from a time far past her own, which of course is Santiago's time, the 24th century.
Language?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Anyhow, that story can wait.
Aberration's tall tales end with Bob sending Mika off to go feed her parasaur Honker, and they pick back up in Extinction with an even more frustrated Mika, who Bob finds sulking a ways away. Something small to make note of which I noticed is that the ground in the Extinction prologue is visibly darker than what we've seen across all the other Tall Tales cinematics, which may or may not imply that there's been another small time skip, possibly taking us to the evening of the following day or maybe even later. It could also be that I'm instinctively looking too deeply into things, but I thought I may as well point that out. Though Bob willingly offers to tell Mika his tall tales this time, Mika isn't really in the mood for them. In fact, this is probably the most upset we've seen her so far. And considering the way she talks about Santiago leading up to and past this point, tells me that the Extinction prologue might take place after another argument between the two. Bob levels with Mika, telling her that while she might be angry with Santiago in the present, being a leader involves making a lot of tough decisions, and that when he needed him the most, Santiago was there for him.
Listen, I get that you're mad at him now, but Santiago was there for your Uncle Bob when it counted. Take it from a guy who's been in his fair share of firefights. Having someone who's got your back is worth all the aggravation. Well, there's some folks who never find their people. And it ain't easy trying to survive out there all by your lonesome.
I guess.
Now, where was I? Oh yeah. So it survived everything else, just to wind up in a high-octane chrome-knuckle junkyard dogfight over the last scraps on Earth.
Okay, yeah!
Making it planetside, what remained of the tech tribe was devastated by the corrupted Earth. Bob, in specific, whose memories ended in World War II, was seeing the effects of the final war, the Element War, fought between the humanists of the Terran Federation and the transhumanists of the United Republics of Earth.
Everything was in ruins, and there was no one around but ghosts.
Ooh, that's awful. So what did you do?
With nowhere else to go, everyone decided that there was nothing else to do but try and use this as a fresh start for themselves, salvaging the plentiful tech scrap in Sanctuary to set up Camp Omega. Once Camp Omega was complete, the tech tribe turned to Bob as their official leader, but seeing as he had no interest in the position, They instead appointed Santiago while he was asleep. This is kind of a weird plot point considering the fact that Santiago was the leader of the tech tribe back on Aberration, at least in Bob's Tall Tales. But regardless, now that he was the leader again, so I guess the double leader, I don't know, Santiago tasked everyone to go out and scavenge Sanctuary for as much tech scrap as they could find, in order for him to build a faster method of transport.
We weren't sure yet how safe we were, even inside the city walls, or what was left of them. So, he sent us out in twos. I got paired up with the Beast Queen, who wasn't much fun to be around after we lost Diana. And I'm sure she wasn't happy getting stuck with me either.
After scavenging for a while, Bob and Mei Yin stumble upon a fountain, which is somehow still functional. Bob suggests naming the surrounding park after Diana, which doesn't exactly cheer up Mei Yin, but it's apparent that she at least liked the idea of having a place of remembrance for Diana.
I like that too.
I'd like to mention that this fountain can actually be found in-game, at the coordinates 4337.8, and is aptly named the Diana Memorial Fountain. I find it funny that, even though this location shipped with Extinction Evolved's initial launch in 2017, it went unexplained for 7 years, taking us until 2024 to explain why it's named after Diana. Also, if the stories Bob are telling Mika aren't considered canon, how did he know about the Diana Memorial Fountain? If Bob wasn't around in the time of Santiago and the others on Earth, who really named it? I don't think it really matters, it's just food for thought. On a scouting mission into the higher ruins of Sanctuary, Bob and Santiago spot proto-arcs dotting the wasteland into the horizon. While observing them from on high, the two survivors watch as an orbital supply drop makes landfall in the wastes.
There was this loud noise and something came crashing down out in the wastes. I could see the gears turning in Santiago's head before he finally spoke up. That slowed down before it landed. Supply drop, maybe. Let's ride out and take it.
Using all the scrap the tech tribe had collected up to this point, Santiago was able to build the first battle rigs, one of which he took with Bob to the site of the initial ODSD. But, fucking Halo? Coincidentally, while driving their way there, another OSD crashed almost directly into their rig.
Because one of those supply drops came crashing down, smack right in front of us.
Yikes.
Trying to pry it open proved useless, and it ended up trapping Bob and Santiago under its force field, while corrupted creatures swarmed the immediate area.
There were still animals left alive?
If you could call that living. Poor critters were all messed up from the poisons out in the wastes, and they didn't much appreciate us.
After successfully defending the supply drop, the two survivors managed to crack it open, and loot all the valuable tech inside, stuffing as much as they could into the back of their rig.
Inside was enough of that tech stuff to make your dad grin like it hit the jackpot. We crammed all we could fit into the trunk.
Are you sure that was my dad with you?
Though Santiago was initially pleased and even confident with their haul, what he and Bob saw next made him change his mind. Because off in the distance, they saw the King Titan.
People weren't ever going to be in charge of a world with monsters that size stomping around. Your old man got his war wagon in gear and kept his foot on the gas until we were back inside the city walls.
Must have been huge if it scared Dad.
Driving back into the city, the two of them agreed not to bring up the Titan to anyone. At least not before they could make a counterplan to fight it.
We wanted time to come up with a new secret weapon. Something big enough to go toe-to-toe with that Titan. I just nodded along and smiled, even though I knew we were all done for.
Santiago parks the battle rig in front of the Diana Memorial Fountain to go over his plan of action with Bob, and Bob points out the flowers Mei Yin had been leaving in her memory.
That was when he told me he missed Diana himself, even though they'd been on opposite sides of the last World War. The big guy seemed to have some real deep feelings after all.
Wait, they knew each other in their first life?
Yeah, kid. It almost seems like some people are meant to meet up again.
With the rest of the tech scrap, Santiago constructed the mechs in order to combat the King Titan, selecting himself, May, and the newly revived Diana to act as pilots.
Diana got brought back again? How?
To make a long, confusing story short, Little Miss Prof became all superpowered using the ARK tech and decided to, Santiago called it, respawn Diana for one last hell of a fight. And so, with the band back together again at the very end, how could we lose? It was game on.
The battle ended in success, and the survivors were able to slay the King Titan, allowing the ARKs to touch down and reseed the Earth, purging the element and its corruption plaguing it, just as we see in the extinction ending. However, the activation of the reseed protocol, came at a great cost. Santiago had gave it all during the fight, and in order to ensure that the other survivors could win, he died valiantly in the process.
When the chips were down and things looked real bad, Santiago never gave an inch.
I didn't know.
Yeah, he's kind of the strong, silent type. No Jimmy Cagney, that's for sure.
Mika doesn't really understand why Santiago couldn't just tell her these things himself, but Bob claims he's been keeping her in the dark ever since their arrival, in order to keep her safe, since nobody on Arat knows why they're there in the first place.
Well, I better not tell you my crackpot ideas. But your dad's been trying to protect you until we figure out what the heck's going on here. Anyhow, those are the kind of tough calls a chief's gotta make.
I wish you'd have been chief instead. You might have let me use tech to bring my mom back.
Aw, kid. I didn't know your mom. But your dad, I'm sure he knows what she'd have wanted.
You knew my mom, dummy. Diana.
Oh, wow.
And with the absolute bombshell that is the reveal of Mika's mother being Diana Alteres herself, so comes the finale of Bob's Tall Tales, the fictitious retelling of ARK's story from Bob's point of view, ending with the tease for Bob's true tales and Mika vowing to revive Diana, no matter what. Though as I promised earlier, we aren't done here. Not quite yet. There's still a lot of questions which go unanswered, even with all of this newly revealed information given to us. While I can't say for certain how Bob's True Tales or ARK 2 will go down, I can confidently offer up a rough timeline as to the events of both, starting with Bob and his time on the ARKs. I think it's pretty clear that Bob does have knowledge of the ARKs, and he was most likely actually on them, but not as an ally of Helena or Rockwell's as he leads Mika to believe. Instead, as a stand-in for the one who tries again, which is essentially you, the player. If you've read or listened to the She Who Waits notes, you know that Helena, in her Homo Deus form, spent a long time incrementally influencing the ARK system in order to give us survivors the ability to respawn and try again after death, so that we could eventually follow in her footsteps and make it down to Earth, where we would slay the King Titan and activate the Reseed Protocol, healing Earth. And we can see in Bob's Island epilogue exactly that. Bob encountering Helena Deus after ascending off of the island, the same way that we players do before and after beating a map, where he's asked to help in the fight for Earth, which wouldn't be possible if Bob was around during Helena's time on the ARKs, as she only ascended into a Homo Deus after a series of events on Extinction, like I mentioned earlier. I believe that Bob is one of the survivors with the ability to respawn, who followed in Helena's footsteps from the island all the way to Extinction, where he helped save the world and activate the Reseed Protocol, gaining a vague idea of the overarching story along the way. as based on his tall tales, he doesn't really know what actually happened between the other survivors before his time on the ARK's 1-to-1, as he wasn't actually there to experience it firsthand. Now, I don't know how Bob does or doesn't tie into Lost Colony, because as of right now, we're led to believe that Bob's true tales will exclusively be a part of, and take place solely on, the Genesis Ascended DLCs. So, if anything, it could get the island treatment like in Bob's Tall Tales, where it's glossed over at the very beginning and doesn't get brought back up again. Or it could take up a bigger portion of the Genesis 1 tales. The thing is, we don't know. But I want you to think about that name for a second with me. Bob's True Tales. We've already established that the stories Bob tells Mika on Arat are rough guesstimations of the actual ARK story up until extinction, but the name True Tales implies that whatever information he'll be feeding her going forward about Genesis is mostly, if not all, factual. And I think I know why. Genesis Part 1 and 2 are an interesting case when it comes to the ARK story. Whereas all previous DLCs essentially have us following in the footsteps of a main group of survivors who long predate us, Genesis puts the player survivor behind the wheel. No longer are we following a predetermined path set forth by those who came before. Rather, we're experiencing the story happen all around us in what is essentially real time, as Rockwell actively invades the Genesis simulation, and by extension, the Genesis colony ship. This leads me to believe that the stories Bob's gonna be telling in Bob's True Tales are canon, because rather than having to pick up bits and pieces of the story along the way like he did on the ARKs, Bob was one of the survivors in the simulation and on the Genesis ship as it was actively being taken over by Rockwell, experiencing everything firsthand. The first installment of Bob's True Tales will likely see Bob recounting his time in the Genesis simulation, with maybe a little Lost Colony on the side, and will include HLNA in some way, shape, or form, as she's obviously very important there. The second installment would then delve into Bob's time on the Genesis ship, and how he helped save everyone aboard, eventually culminating in the defeat of Rockwell Prime and the destruction of everything Genesis as a result of the arrival, releasing humans and dinosaurs onto the alien planet of Arat, ensuring the mission's success. As for where Mika was during the events of Genesis, we might actually have an answer for this.
Welcome, young explorer. My name is HLNA, and I'm going to be your teacher. You are so important, since you'll be among the first children to arrive at our new home. And you're about to join me in a Genesis simulation, designed to help you learn and grow.
As a part of ARK's Nintendo Switch upgrade, Dino Discovery was released on November 9th, 2022, where you play as a child inside an educational Genesis simulation. Not the Genesis simulation, it's a Genesis simulation. There's multiple. While this might seem irrelevant on the surface, I'd like to turn your attention to this tweet, made by Jeremy Steiglitz 5 days after Dino Discovery was released. Quote, "For those ARK lore completionists out there, Dino Discovery has critical, deep connections into ARK 2. Now, while this might look like a joke on the surface, once you start making some obvious connections, you start to see a bigger picture."
It's time to start exploring and see what's out there. Let's go!
Dino Discovery is a safe and educational simulation for young children, designed to teach them about dinosaurs in preparation for the arrival. Most likely to decrease the chances of those same kids becoming lunch to the real deal dinosaurs afterwards, dark as that may be. As for why HLNA is there, well, if you've read the Genesis 2 notes, you'd know that, though she appears to stay alongside us throughout our entire journey, HLNA canonically has some downtime where she tends to help other survivors in the Genesis simulation. Possibly some children in Dino Discovery, and even one of the Genesis crewmates, Nida. That said, let's connect those dots between Mika and Dino Discovery. We already know that she was one of the children aboard the colony ship due to her presence on Arat post-arrival, where in the ARK 2 trailer, she claims that, quote,
All that I know from their Earth are the creatures they sent along with us.
This, combined with the alleged critical connections tweet from Jeremy, all but outright confirms that Mika was one of the children put into Dino Discovery, where she learned about Earth's many dinosaurs, and possibly even met HLNA, seeing how active she was inside of Genesis. From there, we know that Bob, Santiago, and Mika all make it safely to Arat, where Bob likely joins Santiago's tribe, actually meeting him and Mika for the first time in person, having previously heard of Santiago during his time on the ARKs, possibly through Explorer notes. This could explain why Santiago knows about his past life on the ARKs, as Bob could have relayed information from the notes to him, in a more straightforward manner than how he eventually goes on to describe the events to Mika. Or maybe it was the other way around, and Santiago was the one to relay the story to Bob, after somehow regaining his memories from the ARKs. It's also possible that a certain Homo Deus, Helena, granted Santiago these memories herself at some point, according to a tweet response from the current lead writer, Peter Fries.
So HLNA was supposed to tell the colonists about visited Earth and maybe direct them back to it, but she spent too long understanding the world's newly created AI, and Rock left them first.
Unclear on whether Helena would have left HLNA that knowledge, rather than try to give the Genesis mission a chance to succeed. On the other hand, interesting that Santiago was respawned when he was. It's a cryptic response to what was a pretty straightforward question. I mean, Santiago wasn't even brought up initially, but it's still something we can pick apart as a solution. To make this easier to understand, the initial question pretty much boils down to, was HLNA supposed to bring the Genesis ship back to the healed Earth before Rockwell got to everyone? And the answer, no. I'm not sure whether or not Helena would give HLNA that information, instead of letting Genesis complete the arrival. Even though Helena may or may not have given HLNA this information, it's not a coincidence that Santiago was respawned as a part of the arrival. At least, that's how I interpret it. If this is the case, it's possible that Helena Deus somehow bestowed ARK Santiago's memories onto Genesis/ARK 2 Santiago while he was in cryosleep aboard the Genesis ship, before creating HLNA and instructing her to respawn this Santiago during the arrival. It's convoluted, it's even a little confusing, but it's possible, as in the timeline between Extinction and Genesis 1, that is to say, Lost Colony and all of the events predating it, you'd know that Helena Deus is still very much so alive, only exiting our reality sometime after creating HLNA around the time of Genesis 1, give or take a few years. Meaning that not only is she likely going to be present during the events of Lost Colony, but this might be the point in the ARK story where we start to see our first real presence of ARK 2 Santiago being set in place, even if only in the background, as a direct result of Helena and her mission to ensure humanity's survival against all odds. And just to top it all off, another response from Peter Fries which further proves what I'm theorizing.
Thanks for the clarification, though I still do have one question. If Helena created HLNA, then passed out of our reality or universe, why does she tell the survivor others need me in the Genesis 1 teaser trailer? Or is that teaser just not canon?
To which Fries responds, Helena Deus must have had some other good deeds to do or gifts to bestow before she moved on. It's likely that, as soon as he stepped foot on Arat and found his daughter, Santiago immediately turned his attention to all the tech on Arat, as a result of something, which I'll bring up in a moment. It goes quite a bit deeper than him knowing that tech is bad, or can be bad depending on how it's used. In fact, I feel like if my next theory is correct, the reason for Santiago's 180 on tech is actually more emotional than I initially thought. I said earlier that Mika doesn't have any memories of Earth outside of its dinosaurs, but she technically learned about those in a simulation, rather than on Earth itself. Mika, like any other survivor, would need what's called an engrammic matrix to be any sort of authentic clone to her original self. Basically, what a matrix is a fictional part of the brain that stores your memories and personality, and if preserved correctly, can persist long beyond a person's initial death, by hundreds if not thousands of years. Near the end of the world, these matrices were recovered en masse, and used on both the Genesis ship and the ARKs as a means of archiving as many human beings as possible to be later cloned as a part of each project's respective mission, thus explaining why survivors in the ARK story range from ancient 3rd century Chinese warriors to futuristic 24th century freedom fighter mech pilots. The existence of Mika in ARK 2 directly implies that she would have had to die near the end of the world on Earth, as to be cloned, her matrix would have to be salvaged from her corpse and uploaded to the Genesis archives at some point in the distant past. This also means that the versions of Diana and Santiago who conceived Mika had to have been on Earth near the end times as well, and aren't the same ones from Aberration, as they far predate their clone iterations. And due to the nature of Santiago's actions during the Element Wars, and the fact that Mika's not only fairly young, but has zero recollection of Earth, it is my theory that she didn't just die, but was killed by some kind of tech and put onto the Genesis ship for a second chance at life in some distant alien future. Santiago has not only seen the destruction tech can cause as a result of the Element Wars, but he himself caused most of it through his cataclysmic weapons of mass destruction, one of which very well may have somehow unintentionally resulted in the untimely death of his one and only daughter, a casualty in the crossfire of a pointless war Santiago willingly egged on. One which would not only end Mika, but humanity as we know it, or so I am led to believe. Now you understand why Santiago deleted the Genesis system within the grotto, and why he's depicted destroying this cryopod in Bob's Tall Tales. He's sheltering the daughter he lost in another life, no matter what, with complete disregard for her feelings or how it's really affecting her, accumulating in a falling out between the two, after which Bob swoops in to level with Mika. Though it's clear that despite Bob's best efforts, his tales didn't quite resonate with her in the way he had intended. Instead, coming to understand Santiago's point of view, Mika doubles down and becomes dead set on using tech to revive Diana. On the topic of tech, what happened to the Eden Ring after the arrival? Considering how we last see it in Gen 2, you'd think we'd see it in the sky. Wrong. The only time we even see a reference to it is in the ARK 2 announcement trailer, in the form of one of the cave paintings in that tech grotto. Paintings which I still have yet to explain, and probably won't explain until a later video. I feel like I've said that enough already, but this is just so packed to the brim with questions and theories, it'd really be a disservice if I didn't make more videos covering ARK 2, at least in my opinion. Speaking of that tech grotto, the fact that tech exists on Arat should tell you something. Not that it was there before us, oh no, but that parts of the Genesis ship are crashing, or have already crashed, across the surface of the planet. Hence why this room is the same one we see in Genesis 1. It crashed onto Arat after the ship was destroyed. This explains why Santiago's hatchet and spear are both made of tech scrap, and would also explain the existence of this old Tech Rex saddle concept which was accidentally leaked at the very start of 2023. And would you look at that, right at the very end of the second ARK 2 trailer, we see an enormous, crashed piece of ring strewn far, far away from what is presumably the playable area of Arat. I personally believe this to be the Eden Ring, as the ring containing Rockwell's corruption gets blown up at the end of Genesis 2, most likely completely destroying it in the process, though I won't completely reject the idea of it being a piece of Rockwell's garden, as in the ending, we do see bits and pieces of it flying outwards and into space, possibly on a collision course with Arat. From the death of Earth to Rockwell's insanity, Element has always been the underlying antagonist to the ARK story, and this could possibly put it back into play, having somehow persisted after the Genesis ship's destruction, making its way to Arat, before beginning to spread and self-replicate, corrupting the environment around it. As of now, my theory hinges on the fact that we don't really see the Eden Ring outside of those cave paintings, but it's entirely possible that it's just on the other side of the planet, somewhere out of view. I'm not sure. I guess we really won't know until ARK 2 rolls around in 2069, or maybe Bob's True Tales will give us the explanation we're looking for. Now, throughout all of this crazy stuff happening, like the colony ship exploding across the sky and hundreds upon hundreds of giant man-eating dinosaurs being dropped onto this alien planet, Put yourselves in the shoes, or lack thereof, of an Aratai. These guys who attacked Santiago and his tribe at the very start of the video. There's a very justified reason as to why they do this, but we'll get to why that is later in the video. Well, they aren't mutated humans of some kind, nor are they a byproduct of Rockwells. The Aratai are native to this alien world we've begun colonizing and terrorizing as a part of the arrival. Now, socio-political connotations aside, I can't even begin to imagine how terrifying things have to be for the Aratai after the arrival. One day you're picking bushes and hunting for food, before suddenly this giant space ring shoots down a weird new alien race who look and act a lot like you, who brought with them hundreds of their invasive, flesh-eating lizards that are infinitely faster, infinitely stronger, and infinitely scarier than anything you could ever imagine. Together, they start destroying the environment, inadvertently pushing you and your people out. Then, their space ring crashes into your planet in spectacular fashion, raining this magic metal across the sky like hellfire. What would you do? You'd probably try to kill off as many of these intruders as you could, regardless of race, age, or sex, in order to defend your home and your people from a terrifying invasion. Because as much as they are alien to us, we the humans are the aliens to the Aratai. And there we have it. The entire story of ARK 2 and Bomb's Tall Tales to date. This video took me several weeks of writing and editing and rewriting and re-editing and pulling my hair out and punching myself in the balls repeatedly, so a like is much appreciated. There's still a few details I saved for future lore videos, like the cave paintings and such, so subscribe if you want to get notified to see those. Of course, when Bob's True Tales releases sometime in 2026, I'll dissect that as well, along with Lost Colony. But until then, I have servers. Check them out if you enjoyed the video, and leave your theories down in the comments as well, as I'd love to discuss them with you. With that said, my name's Nano, and I'll see you in the next one.
I'm just looking for my cardinal direction. No more time to wander. Lifetimes led to this. Shadows burned inside my head. Yeah. If we're just pawns in a game of survival, this is my right.